Hi, this is Travis Murphy, founder and CEO of Jetr Global Sports and Entertainment. And this is the Sports Business Conversations podcast from ADC Partners.
Hey, this is Dave Elmy of ADC Partners, and glad you're here for this next episode of the Sports Business Conversations podcast. Now, the next 10 years are kind of unprecedented for the United States in terms of global sporting events coming here. So let's do a quick review, okay? We've got the FIFA Club World Cup coming up later this year. Then, of course, the FIFA World Cup in 2026. Then there's the LA Olympics in 2028. Then there's the FIFA Women's World Cup and Rugby World Cup. They'll both be here in 2031. And then, of course, the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City in 2034. I mean, wow, that is a lot to take in. And it's going to require a herculean effort from both the event organizers and government officials to make sure these monumental international events run smoothly. And nobody knows this better than Travis Murphy, the founder and CEO of Jetr Global Sports and Entertainment. Travis began his career working for the State Department in embassies around the world and saw firsthand how sports could easily bridge cultural gaps. He eventually helped lead sports diplomacy initiatives for the State Department and then joined the NBA to enhance the global reach of basketball. With more leagues trying to emulate the NBA's international success, Travis decided to carve his own path with Jetr, and almost immediately found himself playing a key role in helping negotiate the release of basketball star Brittney Griner from Russian prison. In our conversation, we talk about the events leading to Griner's release, what needs to be done leading up to all those global events, and perhaps more importantly, what's lost when the United States is no longer interested in using soft power like sports and retreats from the global stage. So thanks for checking out my conversation with Travis Murphy, the founder and CEO of Jetr Global Sports and Entertainment. Hope you enjoy. Travis, I got to ask you right off of the gate, so how exactly does a kid from Kansas find himself helping to run a U.S. embassy in West Africa? Like, I realize that's a journey and not a destination, but what led you there? Like, how did this interest of yours in diplomacy really start formulating?
Luck.
Yeah.
A lot of luck, I would say, was interjected into the process, but it's certainly not where I expected to be. My high school graduating class was 10 people, so a tiny, tiny school in western Kansas.
I've heard of small schools. That might be the new record for smallest graduating class.
It certainly made you knew everybody in your class in your homeroom. That's for certain.
Yeah, but 10. Did most people stay local to the school? Did people go off to other places?
I think you often. I mean, I think generationally it's changed somewhat. I think that, the people I grew up with, their parents were probably also graduates. Mine certainly were of the same high school, but. As there were less and less economic opportunities there in small town America outside of agriculture and, a couple local jobs, you saw people start to migrate away. But I certainly have been very fortunate in my career to have opportunities to travel and go around the world for a kid that didn't grow up in an environment that necessarily lent itself to that.
So did you always have like a wanderlust kind of aspect to yourself? Were you always interested on things on a global scale, or did it, because you went and worked in politics for a while. You were chief of staff for House of Representatives from Kansas. Did the globalization and then sort of the big State Department foreign service pieces always appeal to you, or did you kind of lead that? Well, you spoke of luck, but it's sort of putting yourself in position to be lucky type stuff.
Sure. Well, we'll talk more about Jetr Global, and I like to say we get a lot of credit for being a bit of an overnight succce, and it is in some respects. It only took 20 years to get there.
Yeah, overnight. Just I guess they're Jupiter years kind of thing.
No, I think to the extent that I understood a global environment, growing up in a pretty sheltered place. Sure. I think there was a desire to kind of get out and do more. I say that somewhat tongue in cheek about luck. I think it's probably more just having really good people in my life and my background that saw potential in me that maybe I didn't even see in myself, that opened doors for me, that allowed me to progress and move down this path. But to your point, I got a job in radio is where I started my career. And but through that, really got an interest in politics. I had I had interest in it, but didn't really know what jobs in that space look like. And so I had a weekly show with my home state congressman who kind of represented the western 2/3 of Kansas. And just through that, we developed a good rapport. And he asked if I'd be interested in coming to DC. And so moved to DC, became his press secretary, and then just kind of moved up the chain there. But even then, I think there was a desire to kind of, you get to DC from Kansas, but then from there, there's a big world out there. And so I had a real desire to do it in a fashion that was, still service oriented, if you will. I still wanted I really enjoyed my time in government, and things have evolved a bit since I was a U.S. government employee in terms of, how one might measure the service aspect of the federal government. But be that as it may, I joining the Foreign Service was an amazing experience, and becoming a diplomat and service, living in countries for 2-3 years at a time and serving around the world really helped shape to everything that I am today.
Yeah, I can only imagine, right? Those kind of experiences. You go from a 10-person high school to running a embassy in Quito. I mean, that's a different experience for most people. But so you're in Foreign Service, and then you get your sort of first job in sports when you serve as you're a senior officer in the State Department in the sports diplomacy.
That's right.
Division. So can you scratch the surface a little bit on what that role entailed, but also partner with that? How did it start to change your thinking in terms of where your career was headed? Because it clearly led to some big things.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Sports had always been growing up in going back to the 10 kids in class, I was a starter on the football team and the basketball team and the track team. It was a pretty low bar.
Yeah, you gotta play offense and defense on everything.
There you go. Yeah, 8-man football. Yeah, went 2 ways. So it was always a part of my life and my upbringing, but it really wasn't. My first tour, as you mentioned, was in Quito, Ecuador. So I lived 2 years in the city there, and for a flatlander from Kansas, living at 9,300 feet was really a pretty amazing experience.
That'll change you. Get some great cardio right there, though.
That's right. You walk out the door on a Friday afternoon, and you can hit a 14er before dinner. But yeah, there was a moment where I think it was so I was working in consular, which means you're either serving as American citizen services, so providing the services of the U.S. government to American citizens in a given country, in this case Ecuador, or you're doing visas, which is interviewing people from Ecuador and other countries who might live there as to whether or not they warrant or deserve to be approved to have a visa to come to the United States. So I did both of those roles in my time there, but there was at one point a donation of softball equipment, baseball, softballs, primarily softballs, but had come into the embassy from a company, and the embassy needed to do an event where they donated these balls to kids in the big park on a Saturday afternoon. So they asked if I would be interested, and I was like, sure, that'd be great. That sounds cool. And so what I didn't realize is that they then put me on the spot and said, can you please explain baseball to the kids? I found myself in this moment where my Spanish was okay, but it was kind of limited to like, what is the reason for your visit a los Estados Unidos? Yeah. And so
you had to tap into a whole new Spanish.
Strikes, balls, like strikes only on the first 2 strikes, but then if you foul on the 3rd strike, you have to swing it. I quickly buried myself in just like a palpable look of confusion across.
Thank God they didn't send footballs. Try to explain that one out.
They're down, but yeah. I struggle with that in English to my kids today.
I know, right? Well, the reason is C.
Yeah. And so, but it was that moment, because so it's just like, okay, I'm done here. I'm cooked. I've lost these kids. But you open the box and there's these balls inside, and it's like, the white ball, the leather with the red stitching. And then it's just like beckon to a girl, and then you throw her the ball and she catches it. And just like that, it was
instant
like
connection.
That to me is like, So it's such a great way to illustrate what sports does, what it is to us as a global society, and the way that a connection can happen in a millisecond. The moment you kick, you throw, you toss a ball to someone, suddenly you're engaged, a bridge is built, and you're working together to create something beautiful.
And language almost becomes irrelevant at that
Exactly.
point, right?
Yeah.
Because
As
there
is
is
religion, race, politics, any of it, right?
Right.
It really transcends so many of those things that divide us.
There's really not that many things can actually do. You think music potentially, but everybody's kind of got their own sort of, I kind of like that and I don't like that. So
Right.
it can be a little bit, but sports, everybody's caught something, everybody's thrown something. It does
Right.
create that sort of universal language. And so you have that experience. Did you start pursuing the sports diplomacy division, or is it something that happenstance kind of ended up taking you that way?
A little bit of both. I was certainly interested and was fortunate enough to get a role in that office. So I was in Ecuador, Suriname, both in South America, then in Cote d'Ivoire for a number of years, serving as a spokesperson for the embassy, and then got the tour back in DC in sports diplomacy. And that was really where I saw kind of because we would get proposals from embassies all over the world. There's 272 currently embassies and consulates. So we did a basketball program in Cambodia. We did a soccer program in China. We were doing programs all over the world. And so any given day, you're like, okay, we got this one in Senegal, but also this one in Argentina. And so it was just, I think there I really started to understand the universality and just the global appreciation for the American sports landscape. And this was also in late, it was late in Obama's second term.
Okay.
And in that time, they were thawing relations with Cuba. And, were they in there with good governance and rule of law and democracy and you need to do this way? No, they were in there with baseball. Right. And so being able to be there and to kind of see how baseball served as that portal through which they could have those conversations it really brought it home.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes it's hard when you look at something like, why are we spending, tax dollars on baseball in Cuba? But it's because it's a means to an end, right? It's not the end unto itself.
On the dollar, on the return we get in terms of relationship building.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have this experience, you start to get a good sense of how sports work on an international scale, the power of the soft power associated with them, the bridge building that goes on between cultures that, you don't even have to, like we talked about, speak the language. But you've been all government to this point. Been working for the U.S. government, been working for representatives in the different embassies around the world for the State Department. At what point did the NBA get on your radar screen?
So it was really through that office. We actually, speaking of Cuba, we did a program where I helped lead that sent Shaquille O'Neal to Cuba. And, that sounds like a Mad Lib. I realize that, but
yeah, it does.
But he spent an amazing couple of days in Havana and the outlying areas. And just, it was Shaq doing Shaq things. It's funny because a reporter went with him and at one point asked him during the trip, just like, why did you do this? And he's like, oh, Obama called and asked me to go, which is not true at all, but that's okay. It's
right.
Like,
in Shaq's world, it probably did happen.
Right. But through that, I got to, the NBA had done some work in Cuba during that same time period. Plus I was working on some other programming with them, and it was a little bit of a right place, right time, Dave, in that they were looking to bring somebody on who had State Department experience. And I was very quick to stick my hand up as far as I could to say, this would be an amazing opportunity. So I came into the NBA in 2016, right when they were launching their Global Academy program. BWB was really taking off, not just as a social responsibility, BWB being Basketball Without Borders, now kind of one of the biggest annual events that identify young international basketball talent around the world. And, the list of kids who went through that program who are now in or previously, played in the NBA is a very long list.
Yeah.
And so it was just, and obviously, that was the time that Antetokounmpo was coming up and Joel Embiid. And, shortly after I got there, Doncic was drafted, Jokic was in the, so it was like all of these international guys that we now see are the MVP winners year after year.
The face of the NBA.
Right there. Yeah.
Was it hard to go from working for a monolithic enterprise like the U.S. government to something that, frankly, is comparatively small, like the NBA? Did you have to relearn anything about how to work, what that environment was going to be like, someone who was used to working in government?
Yeah, it's a good question, but it was remarkably an easy transition because when I got to the NBA in 2016, I was coming there, as I mentioned earlier, with very much a mindset of coming out of public diplomacy, where you're really working on engaging foreign audiences, primarily youth or younger audiences, and talking about America, talking about the positive values that we try to export around the world. And so coming over to the NBA, it was a lot of the same conversations on an international level, talking to youth audiences, but specifically through the lens of basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And so the coordination that was necessary, the conversations we were having really weren't that different.
Okay.
And it was really valuable, I think, to kind of be a bridge between NBA, one of the most global, if not the most global American sports league, and the State Department to understand, okay, what are the needs of an evolving NBA globally, and what is it the State Department can do to help, and vice versa. So really working on building out that relationship a little bit more.
I want you to, if you could, peel back the curtain a little bit on the process that goes into, quote unquote, internationalizing the NBA, right? Because clearly, as we just discussed, it's become a much more international league. Like the players you just reeled off are now sort of the face of the NBA, all of which are international players. Something like 6 of the last MVPs have all been international players.
Yep.
But it's not just as simple as, I'm going to draft a Serbian player and he's going to come over, hop on a plane, and now he's in the NBA. So can you talk about kind of what goes into that in your role as the NBA does look and to expand upon its already pretty considerable international footprint?
Yeah, I had the tremendously good fortune to come in and work for a woman named Kim Bahuni.
Mm-hmm.
Kim joined the NBA in 1990. She was working for Turner Sports and working on the Goodwill games, and David Stern. She helped coordinate a tour of the Atlanta Hawks in then the USSR in the Soviet Union. And David Stern was along on that trip. She was there. And he was so impressed with her, he said, I want to bring you over to the NBA. So this is in 1990. So 2 years later, she finds herself in Barcelona with the Dream Team because they had just for the first time allowed NBA players to play in the Olympic competition. And that was a fundamental game changer for the globalization of basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came in and worked under Kim, and she is just a masterful global leader, and just her ability to work behind the scenes, build relationships is just, it really is stunning. And so, it's not anything, like you said, it's not something, it's just about drafting this one player or, there was these generational players. You think of Dirk Nowitzki, Yao Ming, Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, the guys who came into the Spurs. Like, yes, those were, Steve Nash. They were prominent international players. But all of those were kind of the foundation that built to where we are today. And, the NBA's been doing games internationally for more than 30 years. It's just that, now the NFL is obviously starting to adopt that model a little bit more, but the NBA's been doing this for decades. And it's just now you're starting to see the result of really a globalization of the sport.
So in 2022, you left the NBA and launched Jetr, which is an independent agency. You focus specifically on the niche of sports diplomacy. What was that opportunity for you? Had there always been sort of an entrepreneurial mindset? Is this something that kind of happened to you? I mean, what was the opportunity, and why was that the right moment?
I am not an entrepreneur. I don't. I guess I am.
Are now.
I guess so. I don't consider myself one. I'll say it that way. But
Okay.
I did see an opportunity, and it really. So kind of two things. One, I would say the pandemic is where I started getting calls from other sports leagues saying, whether it was like they were wanting to hold the U.S. Open or the different bubble sort of leagues that they were wanting to do in the United States. And we had to get players back from Europe or participants from other countries. So we were working closely with DHS and the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State. And so that was really where it's like, there's really a need here for coordination across sports.
Right.
Because while the NBA is a bit of a trailblazer and probably the gold standard, NFL, MLB, MLS, all these leagues are international in nature, but don't necessarily have that geopolitical component or background that I think is becoming increasingly important.
So no playbook per se.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So it was really that, and then I also was behind the scenes throughout the process of the negotiations around Brittney Griner being released from Russian prison, and again, that was kind of right place, right time. I had worked at the State Department, I worked at the NBA, I kind of knew the actors that were involved behind the scenes, and it really could serve as a collator in terms of bringing people together, but also just some of it was just being a translator, just like, okay, here's the perspective of a major sports agency that represents this individual. Here's the perspective of the WNBA, a global sports league, and the NBA. Here's the perspective of the State Department, what they can and cannot do in this situation. And so really it was, again, there that it just, okay, I think there's something here that you could build upon.
I want to talk about Brittney Griner for just a minute, because like you just said, you played a key role in helping get her out of the Russian prison, which she had been in for 10 months. I feel like the majority of your job takes place in quiet areas, right? It's a lot of making sure this person is connected to this thing and these papers are filled out. Like there's a lot of operational things that you need to consider, but it kind of happens behind the scene. The Brittney Griner's imprisonment was anything but behind the scenes. It played out very, very publicly. It was a geopolitical issue at the highest ends of it. Mm-hmm. So it played out really publicly. So for someone who I was more or less working in the background, you're kind of thrust into something that's very public. Did it change your approach to diplomacy when it's played out that loudly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the best diplomacy nobody hears about, right? That is what's done behind the scenes. We've done our jobs properly if nobody knows. I mean, not nobody knows, but we're not in the public eye.
Right.
You don't necessarily want to be thrust into that space because it becomes a different environment for having sensitive conversations. And can your interlocutor, the person you're speaking to, trust that this won't also be leaked into the media? So, I was very careful. I can talk about it now as in the past tense, but at the time, I certainly didn't speak to any media, and there were those that were responsible for that, and that was very much their job. And had the outcome been different, perhaps it would be a very different story. It's kind of easy to say, yeah, I played a small role in this because Brittney came home 2 weeks before Christmas, and as a true testament to her resilience, she was right back in the WNBA, which is absolutely crazy to think about 4 months later. And it had a great outcome, and we got, at the end of the day, she was an American citizen, unlawfully detained abroad, and she made it home. And that, at the end of the day, is what's really important.
You've been talking a lot, not specifically to this point, but kind of you can hear the threads of it throughout the conversation, the idea of negotiation. And, everybody's life has so much of it going on. It's happening so much, obviously, we don't sometimes even realize that we're doing it. But that doesn't mean that people always look forward to a negotiation, whether it's, but I'd like 2 cookies instead of 1, or going to the car dealership, or your business, or your personal relationships. So as someone who has spent much of his life working in a negotiating session, I'm wondering how you could describe your approach to entering into that. Like, what skills do you bring to the table that you think really serve you well in that particular regard?
That's a really insightful question. I've not thought of it that way. I have to think that I know I keep going back to this idea, but when I worked on Capitol Hill, I worked for a member of Congress who was very much of the mindset, the mentality that people had voted for him to serve in this capacity, and therefore he had an obligation, to do the best job that he could. Mm-hmm. And so certainly as a young, impressionable Hill staffer, that really inspired me. And so I think that And this was a different time on Capitol Hill. This is 20 plus years ago at this point. And so, there was a little bit more of a sense of like, okay, yes, there's conservatives and there's liberals, but there's also it's a spectrum, right? There's a big middle ground here where
it was a bit more collegial.
Yeah. Your moderate Republicans and your conservative Democrats can come together and then, work together holistically to they can battle during the day, but at night kind of figure out what the best outcome is and reach some solutions. And so I think seeing how that's evolved now and how it's so much less about negotiation and more about kind of the grandstanding kind of
bombast.
Exactly. And then in the foreign service, I was working in really challenging environments. Like being in Ecuador, I was working in American Citizen Services and ended up having to work on a couple of different murder cases, which is, I'm a poli-sci major, and you certainly had moments where I was just like, what happened with my life that I'm wearing
not equipped
gloves in a hotel room because an American citizen had been, involved.
Yeah.
And so, and you're at a disadvantage already because you're not a native speaker of the language. And so it puts you in a position where you have to look at things from the other person's point of view.
Did you bring a softball out of your pocket at that point?
I got nothing here. You guys don't play catch?
Yeah.
Don't get blood. But yeah, so I think it's just, putting me in really uncomfortable places. You got to figure out a way through that, right? And kind of putting yourself in a position where it's like, okay, I have nothing in common with these people, but I got to find out what that is, and let's figure out how to get to yes.
But isn't that the point, right?
That's diplomacy.
That's diplomacy, right? It's all about finding out what other people's perspective are. Like what,
Absolutely.
And you actually mentioned it earlier too. It's like, okay, what is the NBA's position and what do they need to get out of this? What's that sports agency's position and what do they need to get out of this? So much. It's the simplest thing. It's almost embarrassing. I'm going to say this out loud, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. It's like literally that ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes to see their perspective is kind of integral to at least getting the negotiation off to a position where you understand what the outcome can be, or at least have that destination in mind. You talked about it today. We're kind of in a more polarized environment than when you were in. So those kinds of things can be a little bit more difficult, but it's kind of the root of where Jetr and you have to find success, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to circle back to this is that, and I'll kind of shift this to the landscape that I see, the opportunities that I see that lie before us as a country. There's no shortage of things that divides us, whether that's politics, or any number of views on issues of the day as a global society, but sports, as we've said from the top here, is something that really can bring us together. And we have such a unique position here in the United States with what's coming our way. It's happening. And so how we decide to collectively deal with and accommodate these coming events. And what I'm referring to is the following lineup, which is not inclusive of every event because there is so much that's coming over the next decade. But the FIFA Club World Cup is in 2 months. The World Cup is next summer, the largest global sporting event in history. 2 years after that, in 2028, we have the LA Olympics, the Summer Games. We have the World University Games in 2029. We have the Military World Games in 2027 in North Carolina as well. We just announced this week, we're most likely going to get the Women's World Cup in 31, as well as the Men's Rugby World Cup, Women's Rugby World Cup, Winter Olympics in 34. So it's really, we haven't hosted a major sporting event since the Winter Olympics in 2002 as a country. So this is a huge moment for us to really dial in on sports and embrace the opportunities that lie before us. And yes, there's the people-to-people connections. There's improving our status in the world. There's showing that we're a responsible, safe destination for people to travel to. But there's also just the role that sports can play, I think, in instilling positive messages. So much of that is intrinsic in there, right? Whether it's the kids in Ecuador or, NBA players, it's teamwork, it's respect for diversity, it's inclusion. I know these are buzzwords we're shying away from, but we need that if we are going to coexist on this planet together. And so I think there's a real opportunity for us as a country, but we've got a lot of work to really embrace and take advantage of these opportunities.
Yeah, I'm going to quote from the SBJ article you wrote, right, on this very topic, because you said at a government level, we are simply not prepared, and the logistical challenges could prove disastrous for the United States. Now, those are big, bold, underscored words. So when you think about it from a practical standpoint, where are the concerns and what needs to be done to address them in your mind?
I increasingly am hearing, so I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I spend a lot of time with embassies, with government officials, and in meetings on these topics.
Mm-hmm.
And increasingly, I'm hearing this kind of sentiment that like, well, they'll happen. I mean, we'll get there. And it's just like, well, that's fine if it's the family reunion this summer. That's,
literally everybody who works in major events right now is just literally fell out of their chair. Like, unbelievable.
And yeah, we're going to get there. The clock will keep turning, the sun will set and rise, and we will arrive at the time in which these events are taking place. But that's different than planning and executing and really taking advantage of the full breadth of opportunities economically, culturally that are right there in front of us. I have long said that we need some form of individual or office that is a coordinating body at the federal level. We, in a global, looking globally, we are one of the few countries in the world that does not have a Ministry of Sports. We do not have a cabinet level agency that has the convening power to bring together other agencies and say, hey, this is something we need to work on together. Because what needs to happen right now is the Department of State, Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, Commerce, the National Security Council, a lot of different entities, DOD plays a role here, all need to come together and say, all right, here's our plan, here's what needs to be done, here's how we're doing it. And there's just not that coordinating individual or office that has the mandate to do that. And now, when I wrote those words you quoted, that was a number of months ago. And unfortunately, my sentiment still is pretty much the same. I don't think we're any closer to really seeking resolution to the challenges that are out there and really proactively dealing with what's to come.
I feel it's particularly robust, not just from the timing of the upcoming World Cup, but also from the standpoint that we're co-hosting it with Canada and Mexico, two countries.
Frenemies, I think, is what I saw recently.
I guess frenemies, but suffice to say, relations are not rosy right now between those three companies. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, which kind of leads to the final question I have for you, which is kind of following on that point, which is like we're at this period where the U.S. seems to be undergoing a certain amount of retreat on the global stage. So I'm interested as we wrap up, as a former State Department guy and someone who's literally founded a company, Jetr, that is focused on these ideas of diplomacy and using sports as soft power. I'm wondering if you have an idea on what's gained or lost by the seeming retreat from global investments in these kinds of programs.
So I will speak completely nonpartisanly. This is not a partisan point of view, but I struggle with the idea that we can be isolationist in this global society that exists in 2025.
Mm-hmm.
The news in the morning about the markets is what happened in Japan, right? And that immediately affects people. And we are in such a global environment. I do think there's a balance we can strike between, preserving certain ideals that are inherently American while also being accepting that we are a part of a larger global society. But we're in this pendulum swing that is just far too dramatic and doesn't allow space, time, or breath for nuance. And, diplomacy, international relations is not a static concept. It's constantly evolving. It's constantly in flux. And it is nuanced in the way that, our relationships with our family are nuanced. It just is. But, it's the same way. You can say, you know what? My family's changed too much. I don't want to deal with them. I'm not speaking to any of them, and I'm going to charge them to come over to my house. Like,
you can do that.
Just accept the fact that, yes, you maybe your rules have changed and how you engage, but you still do it because you're part of this overarching family and you want to be a part of that. And the whole family is served by everybody being together around the table on Thanksgiving. I haven't workshopped this analogy, so I'm not sure if it's completely apt. I'm sure you could poke holes in it, but
I'll tell you what, we'll do a fan poll at the end of the podcast to see if these work.
Yeah. So, but perfect, complete estrangement and isolation, I think, is not something that's really just possible in 2025, nor does it serve the interests of, what we're talking about with these sporting events, because the Olympic movement is based in inclusivity and people having global access to sport. And so it seems some of these roads we are going down are almost completely the antithesis of that movement.
A little counterintuitive in that regard.
Yeah.
I'm with Travis Murphy. He is the founder and CEO of Jetr Global Sports and Entertainment. Travis, this is a conversation that I feel like could go on and on and on, but unfortunately we have things we have to get to. And the first and foremost of those is the lightning round. These are several questions that are going to come out of nowhere.
Okay.
And your job is to answer them with the first thing that comes to your mind. Are you ready?
I am ready.
I feel like you have to be like
I'm ready.
I feel like your whole sort of career trajectory has prepared you for this moment in particular. Okay, first one. Now, the Foreign Services Officers Test is notoriously challenging. What was one question that made you think, come on, I mean, that's just not fair?
There is a written exam, and then there is an essay question portion that has to be submitted. And then the third component is an oral exam.
Oh,
I know this isn't a lightning answer, but the oral exam is bringing everybody together in Washington, D.C., complete strangers. You're then thrust into a room and handed a piece of paper that says, you're the Department of Agriculture and you're at the country all hands meeting at a country team. You have to advocate for your priorities, and $80,000 worth of funding is necessary, but 7 other agencies are competing for this funding. Go.
I just broke out in a sweat even thinking about that. That is hardcore. Okay, like I said, it's notoriously challenging. All right. You served in places like Côte d'Ivoire, Suriname, Ecuador. What was the best food you had?
We talked about the mountains earlier. I did a lot of mountaineering, a lot of hiking in Ecuador. Summited 2 peaks. I have done Kilimanjaro, but 2 peaks higher than Kilimanjaro in Ecuador.
You are not in Kansas anymore. No.
Chimborazo. And any food coming off a mountain where you're at 19,000 feet is the best meal. But Ecuador had this alocro, which was like this potato soup, warm, coming off the mountain.
Mountain.
Yeah. I don't ever want to go back and have it again because my memories of it are so great. And
just leave it alone. Just leave it alone. You can't go home again type stuff. Okay. I recently got a speeding ticket driving in Italy. Can you help me get out of it?
Diplomacy at its finest. I got a guy.
You got a guy. This guy got a guy is another one. Okay, last one. You're fluent in French and Spanish. Please pick one and say, my goodness, what an enjoyable podcast interview this has been.
Mon Dieu. C'était vraiment un plaisir d'être avec vous aujourd'hui et merci pour l'opportunité.
Okay, so I'm going to have to go back to Google Translate and see what you actually said. But Travis Murphy, really appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
David, thanks so much for the opportunity. This was great.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the One-on-One Sports Business Conversations podcast. If you enjoyed it, we always appreciate a subscribe, share, comment, or like. And don't forget, you can always find past episodes at abcpartners.com/podcast. This podcast is written, produced, edited, and hosted by Dave Almy. And theme music was composed by Scott Holmes.